Arcade stick controllers are prevalent in the fighting game community for their precision and legacy. A variation of these controllers are leverless controllers, where the directional lever is replaced with 4 buttons. Not only does this give you more control over the inputs, but it reduces the amount of unique parts required, reducing the cost and complexity in manufacturing, making it ideal for DIY projects. I decided to create my own leverless controller based on a design by Luda on Thingiverse. I added changes to the design because I wanted to add a Type-C to micro USB adapter. I also wanted to reduce the amount of material required in 3D printing. On the bottom part of the case, I added these mounting pins for the electrical components, as well as support pins that prevent bending if you press the switches too hard. The switches I used were these cherry style Red Dragon bullet switches. I also installed a small screen. The controller is powered by a Raspberry Pi Pico. Luckily, I didn't have to do any coding since the firmware is open source and available online. Designing the case was definitely the longest part of this project. I started out by copying all the features from the original design that I wanted to keep the same. I wasn't that experienced in SolidWorks at the start, so I spent a lot of time figuring out how to do things and watching YouTube tutorials. When I had all the parts for the case design, I started designing an assembly. This was to double check to make sure that everything fit well together, but it also helped a lot to line up the mounting pins for the screen and microcontroller. So I ended up designing most of the bottom case only after finishing the assembly. The design process involved a lot of iteration. I did some test prints to make sure the electronics would fit. I also had to change the keycap design because it broke after a few weeks of use. But when the case design was finally done and I knew everything was the right size, I was really excited because I was finally able to start printing it and see my goals become a reality. I 3D printed my case at the university makerspace where they used Reality CR10s. 3D printing for me was the most expensive part of the project, but if you have your own 3D printer, then the filament costs alone will be less than the electronics. Once all of the parts were 3D printed, I had to wire everything up. I decided to hand wire this controller instead of making a PCB. I was really happy when I plugged it in and everything worked. Shortly after I completed it, I actually bought Street Fighter 6 on Steam. Like, that's how excited I was to have this controller. The project wasn't done yet though. I still wanted to add some finishing touches, which included filling any imperfections, sanding it down, and I decided to spray paint it with this metallic grey color. I've been using the controller for the last 2 months and I still haven't run into any issues. I've managed to reach a silver rank with Jamie and Zangief. You can see me pulling off a sick Jamie combo right here.
Come on, it's time to train.
I actually picked up Zangief to see if I could do the 360 and 720 motions on Leverless. But after I learned the right technique, it's actually pretty easy for me to do these motions consistently. I had a lot of fun building this controller, and I also learned a lot in the process. If you are into fighting games, I definitely recommend building your own leverless controller, especially if you have access to a 3D printer, since leverless controllers on the market are currently really expensive. You also don't have to know much about 3D modeling to make one, since there's so many designs on Thingiverse that you can just use one of those. Thanks for watching.